In our final segment today, we're examining what many are calling the strictest Medicaid work requirements ever passed by Republicans. And this was the critical component that got the one vote over from to, okay, we're passing a bill. I mean, it's unbelievable. If you ever thought that your vote didn't count in this aspect, that one vote counted. So we're going to break it down. What are these new requirements? And what would they actually mean for Americans on Medicaid? Now, remember, this isn't Medicare. This isn't what like retirees receive after they turn 65. This is Medicaid. This is if you are an indigent or somebody within the poverty guidelines that receive free health care for their children, or for people that are disabled, they're on Medicaid because they're not at retirement age or eligibility for Medicare. Under this legislation, childless adults without disabilities, that's crucial to, let's say, no children and no disabilities. So you're not on SSI, you're not on SSDI, would need to prove they worked, volunteered, or attended school for at least 80 hours in the month before enrollment, which averages about 20 hours a week. This is a significant departure from previous proposals. What makes this version particularly stringent, for starters, states could require proof of work for up to 6 months or even a year before someone becomes eligible. Those who failed to meet these requirements would not only lose Medicaid coverage, but would also be blocked from receiving subsidies for private plans under the Obamacare marketplace, essentially or potentially cutting off all pathways to affordable coverage. The Congressional Budget Office estimates these Medicaid changes would cause 7.6 million people to lose health insurance coverage. Most of these individuals would actually be eligible for the program, but the Congressional Budget Office is stating that they are unable or maybe uneducated to navigate or comply with the strict documentation requirements, which would be a great opportunity for nonprofit organizations or legal aid organizations to then try to get grant funds or use grant funds to help these people, because that's what legal services there. A little plug for legal services, also an educational side note. This would save the federal government approximately $280 billion over 6 years. That is triple what earlier Republican plans would have cut. House Speaker Mike Johnson has framed this as returning the dignity of work to young men who need to be out working instead of playing video games all day. However, data suggests a different reality. Most Medicaid enrollees are already working, in school, or too sick to be employed. And contrary to the speaker's characterization, unemployed Medicaid enrollees are more likely to be older women, not young men. And we do have some real world examples of how these requirements might play out. So back in 2018, Arkansas implemented a work requirement that was significantly less stringent than this proposal. And even with that more flexible approach, 18,000 people lost coverage, not because they weren't working, but because they didn't know about the rule or couldn't navigate the paperwork. Georgia, the great state of Georgia, they had a program that they passed beginning in 2023, which more closely resembles this proposal. That Georgia program spent over $30 million to manage the work requirement system, yet only 7,000 people have enrolled, far short of the 100,000 state officials had projected. President Trump has insisted no one will lose health insurance under this legislation, but the evidence and expert analysis suggest otherwise. The bill originally gave states until 2029 to implement these requirements, but conservative lawmakers fought to accelerate the timeline. And so the current version would require states to have those systems in place by the end of next year, 2026. And as we look ahead to the Senate's debate, it's worth noting that while Republican senators generally support work requirements, some have expressed reservations about large Medicaid cuts. The question now is whether they'll view these particular requirements as reasonable reforms or as de facto cuts that could leave millions without health care coverage. Or is it really the impetus to say, you know what, there's a lot of people that have been just milking the system, not working, or maybe even working under the table, and it's time to get some of these well-abled, non-disabled, childless people back into the workforce. And when you're seeing that everybody's hiring and nobody's coming in, maybe that is also a benefit. Time will only tell. But one thing is for certain, there is going to be an impact. Whether you want to admit it or not, it will have an impact. Whether it will be as big of an impact and as much of a savings cost over the decades, time will tell. Time will also tell to see how it could potentially affect those that need it the most. And if it is older women who find themselves, maybe for whatever reason, no fault of their own, find themselves needing Medicaid, then that's going to be an issue. There might be also some other reforms that need to be done or tweaks, because if someone is severely ill, but they are not disabled, let's say somebody has cancer, will they be denied Medicaid? So these are the things that are still going to be fine-tuned. And again, the Senate now has this, and I'm sure the Senate will make its own tweaks and then throw it back to the House. But one thing is for sure, Mike Johnson did something that some thought would be impossible. He eked it out. He got it passed by that one vote. And before I close today's program, I need to address some deeply troubling news that broke Wednesday evening in our nation's capital. 2 Israeli embassy aides, Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram, were fatally shot outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., where the American Jewish Committee was hosting a reception. According to reports, the suspect exclaimed, "Free, free Palestine," when taken into custody. Ambassador Yeshua Leiter shared the heartbreaking detail that the young couple had been about to become engaged. This tragedy is part of what law enforcement officials and monitoring groups describe as a global surge in anti-Semitic incidents that began after that horrific Hamas attack of October 7, 2023. Since that day, offenses against Jewish people and property have doubled or even tripled worldwide and have remained at historically high levels throughout Israel's 19-month military campaign in Gaza. This data is sobering. In France, anti-Semitic incidents increased 260% compared to 2022. That's 2.5 years ago. In Germany, cases involving expressions of hatred against Jews doubled to over 5,600 in 2023. In Britain, such incidents rose 112% over a 2-year period, with 201 cases involving physical attacks on Jewish people. Here in the United States, we've witnessed similar disturbing trend. The firebombing of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's home earlier this year, where the suspect cited Israel's treatment of Palestinians, is just one example of the rising hatred against Jews. The violence doesn't occur in isolation. It follows a pattern of attacks on Israeli diplomatic outposts worldwide. Molotov cocktails thrown at embassies in Mexico City and Bucharest, a crossbow attack in Belgrade, gunfire at an Israeli consulate in Munich, and grenades detonated near the embassy in Copenhagen. As we reflect on these events and send sympathies and compassion to the family of this young couple, it's important to recognize that while passionate political disagreement is the cornerstone of democracy, hatred and violence are never acceptable responses, and violence is not protected First Amendment right. The line between legitimate criticism of government policies and anti-Semitism becomes blurred when the criticism targets individuals simply for their identity. Professor Walter Reich at George Washington University notes that this conflict has exposed historical hatred of Jews that had been somewhat contained in the decades following the Holocaust, saying, and I quote, "Pent-up violence against Jews has exploded globally, often masquerading as anti-Zionism. It has targeted both Jews and their state." So as we close today's program, I want to emphasize that in times of heightened global tension, our commitment to protecting all communities from hatred and violence must remain unwavering. We can debate policies vigorously while we still respect the fundamental dignity of every person, regardless of the color of their skin, of their nationality, or of their religious or non-religious classification. And as we approach Memorial Day this coming Monday, I'd like to take a moment to honor the brave men and women of our armed forces who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect the freedoms we hold dear. Their courage and devotion to duty embody the very essence of what makes America exceptional. They gave their lives so that we, the people, could continue to live in liberty and pursue our constitutional rights. This weekend, as we gather with family and friends and travel, let's remember that our nation's freedoms were purchased at a tremendous cost, and let's recommit ourselves to being worthy of their sacrifice. I am Alina Gonzalez Dockery. Thank you for joining us today on We the People. I am proud to say that I am American, and I thank every single one of those armed forces, the people of our personnel of our armed forces who continue to sacrifice for the benefit of this country. I shall see you next week when we continue our thoughtful analysis of the events shaping our nation and our world. Wishing you all a good night.